And that's how a chainsaw was designed. It was designed to cut timber in the woods, cut firewood, things like that, directly across the grain. It wasn't designed to rip. But you can change that. And that's what I do. There are several companies that sell what they call ripping chains. I've never had them really work very well. The best that I know of is sold by the company that makes that sawmill, Granberg. It's not a manufactured chain in the way that it's not manufactured by Oregon or Steel or anybody else to rip. It's redone. So this is what I do, and this is what Granberg does. You just get a chain that fits your saw, and you get it in what they call full comp configuration. That's as many teeth normally as you can get, and you don't get full chisel chain. So full chisel chain is what I was a timber faller for years, and that's what timber fallers and everybody uses. It cuts the fastest and all that. But I use a semi-chisel chain, and this is actually the configuration of a semi-chisel chain. This representation of a tooth is actually semi-chisel. It's kind of got a rounded corner. And so you take and you get yourself a full comp semi-chisel chain. And then what you do is you take a grinder, a Dremel tool or something like that, and you start right here at the top, and you cut this tooth off here so that it's like that. And then you do the next one, so the next tooth up will be the other way. You know, it'll be the opposite of this. So you take two teeth, and anybody can look at the chains if you want to later on. You take two teeth and you split them. So when those teeth are split, then you go the next two teeth and you leave them alone. You don't do anything to them yet. And then you go the next two and you split them. And you do that all the way around the chain. Now when you do that, what you're going to want to do is, if this was like your grinding wheel, you want to come and do it slow. This is kind of a tedious thing to do. And you want to come from the side. Don't cut it from the top. And the reason that you don't cut it from the top is because if you slip, you'll grind off the chrome. Chainsaw teeth are plated with chrome. It'll grind that chrome off, and then it won't stay sharp very easily. So you go about half for two teeth, leave them alone, two teeth ground, and go all the way around. The next step is you take those ones that are split, and you take this is called the raker. It's actually called the depth gauge by the chain people, but everybody calls it a raker. And this goes down 20 thousandths to 25 thousandths deeper than the other teeth.
The regular teeth?
Yeah, than the teeth you leave alone.
Right.
And
all the rakers?
All the rakers, not the ones that you leave full. The ones that you leave full, the rakers stay normal, but you run them a little bit deeper than you would if you're cutting firewood or something like that. Well, we're not done yet. The next thing you do is you get a file, and you go here and you change this angle to between 10 degrees and 0. And you do that on all the teeth all the way around. Then you have a ripping chain. Now I know that everybody's probably wondering, well, what does that do? When you cut with the end grain, when the end grain of the tooth cuts into the very end of the log, this top plate does loads of work. Because what happens is, let's say for instance, if you take a wood chisel and you stick it in the end grain of a log, you can work it up, and you don't have to have anything on the sides to get it out of there. You can just work it right out of there. Well, what this does when you have this split is this goes down the side and it cuts on the side of the cut. The center, there's a ridge left in the center. And the other teeth come along and clean it out. So what happens is you have less resistance, and it's almost like having less teeth on the chain because it's a lot less resistance. If you cut with a regular chain, you just take your regular old firewood chain on your regular old chainsaw, and you try to rip with it, you're going to get about that far into the log and it's going to be dull. It slows down dramatically and it doesn't work very good, and it's really disheartening, and that's why there's so many Granberg sawmills for sale at yard sales, because people, they get tired of it. The one thing I am going to mention is sawmilling lumber with an Alaskan sawmill and a chainsaw is not for the faint of heart, and it's not for the lazy. It's extremely hard work. If you go out in a day, like say you take your quad or your whatever out in the woods, and you saw lumber all day, you will sleep well that night. It is extremely hard work. So that's kind of the lowdown on ripping chain. So the biggest thing with a Granberg Alaskan sawmill is the first cut. The first cut is the most important. And so you can see right there that there's just a plain old everyday 2x6 there. There's nothing special about it. If you want, you can get that Granberg sawmill that's bolted to that saw right there, and one of those, and you can put it on the log just like that. Now, you can use screws, you can use nails, but you have to make sure that it's not going to wobble when it's up there. So you can use little wooden wedges, sticks, all different kinds of stuff. Generally try to use wood so that if your chain hits it, it's not a big issue. So if you had a saw, the Granberg mill, and a 2x6 that's 2 feet longer than the log you're going to cut, you can saw lumber. I did it a lot when I was really young. A lot. It's a lot more work, it's a lot more painstaking, and it's kind of disheartening. And after a while, you're going to try to figure out, well, man, something's got to be better, because the preparation with an Alaskan sawmill is pretty huge. So I came up with that guide system that is nailed and screwed to the top of the log. So I keep a bunch of stuff with me. I always keep a decent axe with me. This is probably one of the best tools I ever bought. It's made by Estwing. It's called a Fireside Friend. And just like everything else, these are real expensive now. And they're good for cleaving off knots and bumps and imperfections in the log where it goes this way and that way. You know, and if you're going to saw something like, say, an oak or an elm or something like that, and it's really, really nasty and bumpy, then you're going to want to, you have to clean it up really well. There's a couple of guide systems that Granberg sells that kind of take care of that. One of them is called Easy Rails, but then again, you're getting into more money. And another one is, they call them slabbing rail brackets. They're used with 2x4s, and they screw and bolt to the end, and they put 2x4s up above everything. So that's a basic Alaskan sawmill right there. That one out there that's bolted to that saw. So that saw out there, I'll get into saws a little bit. That saw is a Husqvarna 395. It's about 22 years old, and it's sawed about 50,000 feet of lumber. A lot of people will tell you that, well, you'll never get any life out of a chainsaw ripping with it. That's not true. If you know what you're doing, and you have a sharp chain, and you keep the filter clean and the fuel mixed properly, a saw will last longer ripping lumber than it will anything else. And there's a reason for that. You rev the saw up and you put it into the wood, and it just pulls down to a certain level and it stays there. Probably everybody here has cut firewood or poles or fence posts or something, and when you cut a tree down and you limb it, the saw is going up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down all the time. Well, if you take your car and you go down the road and you go like this with a throttle, I guarantee you'll only get half the life out of it. Chainsaw is the same way. But most people don't get a lot of life out of them because they overheat them, they don't keep the chain sharp, and they don't take care of them. So they don't last very long. It's kind of a it's kind of one of those funny quandaries where here I've gotten loads of time out of my saws, but there's some people, they don't get 3 months out of them ripping lumber with them. So I have there is another sawmill. This is also made by Grandberg. This one's 20 some odd years old. And you can see on there, it's called the Mini Mill Chainsaw Lumber Making Attachment. They don't call it that anymore. It's exactly the same thing, but now they call it the Edger Mill. And what this is for, this is supposed to be in conjunction with that mill. And what it works with is that thing there with the aluminum guide on it. When you buy it, you get 12 foot of those guides. They're 2 feet each, and some little wood screws, and there's a groove that fits on there, and that's how it works. Instead of cutting this way, it cuts this way. And it's another expense, but it will make life a whole lot easier. How big of a saw should you use? I would never really recommend anything lower than 70 cc's. And Stihl and Husqvarna both make saws that are over 100, and they work really well. Saws that have low end torque, and generally saws that big have a lot of low end. You know, Stihl's is the 881, Husqvarna's is the 3120. One of them is 122 cc's, the other one's 118, so it's not much, it's not like a dirt bike engine. They're heavy, they're powerful, and they will work the ever living hell out of you. And they're expensive. In my local town, they just set up a new Stihl shop. They have an 881 on display in there. It's $2,250. You have to ask yourself, how much lumber are you going to cut? You know, how much do you need one? What can you get away with? So, Husqvarna's the 372 is a 71 cc saw. Stihl, the 462, I think it is now, is, I believe, a 77 cc saw. That's where I would start, is with those. I wouldn't go much smaller than that. And it's not that you can't do it. You can do it. I mean, you can pull a semi-trailer, you know, with a Datsun pickup if you get it going. You know, but it isn't the best idea. If you order one of these, and we'll just call it the Edger Mill because that's what they call it now. If you order one of those, what you'll get is you'll get some of those. I think enough for a 12 foot board. You got to have longer than what you're cutting because it has to go on and it has to go off a little bit. And what you'll receive is everybody's seen these duplex nails. You'll receive like 8 of them or something like that with that because they're meant to put in the board down on the log. But these are 16 pennies, they'll give you 20 pennies. I don't know where they get 20 penny duplex nails because I look everywhere and I've never found a 20 penny duplex nail at any hardware store anywhere. But apparently somebody makes them. Now, this Edger Mill is designed to be in conjunction with that, and it's designed to go on a flat surface. So after you make your first cut, it's designed to cut the edges off. But it has one other little perk, and if I can remember, if I brought it with me. So this is what the guide pieces look like when you get them. They're 2 feet long. They're made of an extruded aluminum, and One of the neat things about this is if you were to decide to do it, so you can take, the saw runs down here. What you can do is you can take a bunch more of these and you can put them right over here. And you can have 2 of them. Now you have a house log mill. What you can do is you can screw this to a log that's rounded, you know, a small log. You know, it's got to be bigger than this. And you can go down one side and up the other, and you have a 2-sided house log. The thing that you want to do if you do that, you got to make sure that your board is not going to move. So you can use wedges, pieces of wood, pieces of firewood, just cut at an angle and wedged. That's something that works really good. I've done it. That's not how I built mine. My log cabin's almost done. But so this is some of the tools that I carry with me. Everybody probably knows what this is. This is a picaroon. So this little point, this is a really old logger's tool. It was used by pond monkeys and people in sawmills and stuff. You reach out and grab a board or something like that, you could jab this thing in and it puts you a handle on it. I never go anywhere without wedges in the woods, never. I was a timber faller for a long time and I used to carry about 10 wedges with me. And back in those days I carried an 8-pound sledgehammer, but I'm not tough enough to walk up and down hills and carry a 50-pound chainsaw and a bunch of wedges anymore. Everybody probably knows what this is. This is a peavey. It's probably one of the most indispensable tools that a person can have if you're doing anything with logs. Does anybody not know what it is? Okay. So this goes on the log like this. If this was a log, it goes like this to roll it over or move it.
You can lift it up too out of the dirt.
Yeah, you can lift it up out of the dirt. This one doesn't have a stand on it. Some of them have a stand on them where you can lift it up and it stands there and it's out of the dirt and you cut firewood. I have one of those. I never liked it very much because I think it's kind of cheaply made.
Do you ever use carbide blades, or what are your thoughts about carbide blades?
So they do make carbide chains. They don't cut as smooth, they don't cut as fast, and they're really hard to sharpen. As a general rule, carbide chains are used by construction companies and firemen and people like that where they know they're going to be cutting garbage and nails and stuff like that. They don't cut wood really all that well. And you can't file a carbide chain. You have to have a special grinder. In fact, if you had a carbide chain, you probably couldn't take it to your local saw shop and have him grind it, because the carbide is just too hard and it takes a special wheel to do that. And it also takes somebody that is pretty savvy and knows what they're doing to be able to grind it. So,
Can you talk about sharpening a little bit?
I can talk about.
What's your go-to?
Okay, that's a pretty good question. So, whether it's ripping chain, cross-cut chain, or anything else, there is a rule that pretty much all the chain companies have. When you put a file in here, now I'm talking about round filing. I'm not talking about filing with a chisel bit chain like timber fallers do. I know how to do that, but this is not the place for that. With a round file, the rule is 80-20. 80% of the file goes in this, which is called the gullet, and 20% sticks up above. And it's pretty simple and it's pretty universal, no matter what kind of chain you're filing. If it takes round file, 80% in and 20% above. Now, if it's your firewood saw or something like that, you see that line right there? Most chains now come with a line like that, and that's a guide for the angle this way. One of the biggest mistakes that people make is they think, well, I'll make my chain cut better, so I'll just have a really hard angle on it. What that does is that makes it just kind of pick with the point, and it just pulls out kind of a bug dust. It doesn't cut very well. If you want to learn how to file a chain, I can tell you that the best way to do that is to get a chain that is sharp and cuts the way it's supposed to, and cut with that saw. That way you have the feeling of knowing what it's like. If you're doing a cross cut, the saw should just kind of feed itself in. It's just going to kind of glide in. Personally, I don't think there is harder work in the world than running a dull chainsaw. I don't think harder work exists. There might be. I don't know. Chewing horse is pretty tough, but running a dull chainsaw really sucks. Any other questions?
Is there any pointers or tips on when you've made that ripping chain? Is there anything special on sharpening that? Just kind of the same basic guidelines.
It's the same
tricks?
basic guidelines. Yep.
Just different angle.
The one thing I would say is when it's dull, sharpen it. Okay, if you're cutting a piece of firewood and you got 6 feet of log to cut up and you know your saw's dull, you can say, you can get away with cutting it up. With a rip chain, when it gets dull, there's something about it that seems to be an exponential snowball effect. It's dull, and it's just like the further you go, the duller it gets. And it's really, really, really hard on the bar because the bar gets really, really hot.
What type of rotary files would you recommend?
I wouldn't.
You'd always use a regular file?
Yep.
Okay.
I'm kind of an old school guy. I was a timber faller for a long time, and I wouldn't recommend like the ones that they have on Dremel tools and stuff. And there's a reason why I wouldn't recommend them. They're too easy to take off too much of the tooth, to get too deep, to get too high, and to just like, oh wow, this works. And the next thing you know, the tooth is not right. Now that you brought up sharpening, I don't have one with me. I left it home, like I left a whole bunch of stuff home, but I live 500 miles away, so Granberg makes a thing called a file-in joint.
A file-in what?
File-in joint. It's spelled file-n joint. It's one of those weird, quirky things that's not spelled right. And what it does is it clamps onto the bar right here, and then it's got a whole bunch of degrees this way and this way. And it's got a file on it, and then it's got 2 plastic nylon-like guides. And when you get it set up right, all you do is just sit there and you just move it into the tooth. And it will work for your firewood saw, it'll work for anything. And they came up with it because sometimes I kind of get screwed up because I'm not used to filing all the time. I'm still a residential timber faller for a tree service, and I file regular chains, and then I go home and file rip chains, and then file my other regular chains, so I have to think about it. I have one of those, but I forgot to bring it. They work really, really good, and one of the really cool things about them is they will teach you to file freehand. If you use one enough, eventually you won't need to use one. That's how we teach guys at the tree service that I work at. That's how we teach guys to file that can't. And so far it works pretty good. Does anybody want to see me cut that log?
Yeah, and then can you talk to us about chainsaw sizes? I see you got a bunch of different sizes. Is there?
I do. So I'll tell you about that first. So that chainsaw over there is 94 cc's.
What number is that?
That's a 395 Husqvarna.
Okay.
This one here is a 372. This particular model is 75 cc's. I have a Husqvarna 550 that's 50 cc's. Now I don't use that to rip with, and it's a good thing you brought that up. It reminded me about something. So if you get a chainsaw that you want to rip with, it's really nice to have another chainsaw. to cut trees down, cut limbs off. You get a knob or a knot or something like that, and you got to cut it off. It's nice to have that. You know, that's one of the reasons why I have an axe and I have a whole bunch of tools. I have an Echo 58 volt battery powered electric saw. And if you're, I'm just going to tell you that those things they're handy for things like building chicken pens, goat pens, going out and doing stuff. They're really neat if you're going to build with poles. I build with poles a lot because you just pick them up, pull the trigger, and make a cut. You don't have to pull them. They're not a substitute for a gas-powered saw. They're not. They have their place. It's kind of a niche thing. I bought that one because I had some tools that I wasn't using, and I sold those tools, and I thought, well, I'll just buy that because I'll use that. And I do use it. But it's not a replacement.
You got a debarker on here?
I do. So this is a 50cc Echo saw. It's a 4910, and everybody can see this thing here. It's driven with, you're supposed to use cutterless chain. You can buy cutterless chain from places. I just took an old chain and cut all the cutter teeth off of it. That's what I did.
You can do that on the asphalt, right?
Huh?
You can do that on the asphalt. Just run the chain.
You can do that on the asphalt. I don't know that I'd recommend it.
Wear safety glasses.
The first time you pull teeth out of your knee,
Oh, wow.
and I've done that. This works really good if you're going to peel logs. This is the way to go.
Wow.
So this one's called the Log Wizard. There's about 3 other companies that make them. I'm not sure who else makes them, but the Log Wizard was the first one. So, being as how he pointed it out, I'll tell you about it. You have to drill out the bar. If you don't know what you're doing drilling a bar out, you're going to get really frustrated because they're hard. Okay, they're generally spring steel, and they're hardened pretty good. The best way to drill them is with a drill press and a cobalt bit. And if you drill them and you start to drill, make sure that it just keeps drilling. Okay, cobalt's harder, and it's the hardest drill bit you can get, and it works really good, but they don't give cobalt bits away.
You probably want to use cutting fluid or something like that.
You do.
On there.
So this is not a professional grade chainsaw. It's kind of a cheapy saw. I just needed it because my son's girlfriend stole my other saw.
Sounds like you got to keep her.
He did.
And do those teeth get damaged? Do they last a long time? Or are they carbide on?
No,
that?
they're not carbide. You're supposed to buy new ones when they get dull, but I cheat and I sharpen my own. You can't sharpen them with a file, but you can sharpen them with a belt sander if you're really careful. I kind of was born with a gift of being able to sharpen just about anything. So I take those blades off and I sharpen them. After a while, if you sharpen them, you got to replace them because they get too short. The one thing I'm going to tell you, if you get a debarker, I highly recommend not wearing shorts when you use it. Now, I personally never wear shorts, but that thing will mess you up pretty bad.
And you do that ahead of where the blade's going to come into the log? You don't have to do it on both sides. You only have to do it where the chain's going to be coming into the log.
Yeah.
Right?
And I don't necessarily use it a lot, sawmilling. I actually bought that when I decided to build my log cabin. So you can see that I'm wearing chainsaw chaps. I can tell you from personal experience what I've seen. If you run a chainsaw without these, you're a damn fool. If you have ever seen what a chainsaw does to a human thigh cut all the way to the bone, and I have, you're going to wear these. It is ugly. I got a guy to the hospital with 30 minutes left to live. If I hadn't got in there, he would have died. And the chainsaw is a hard biting tool. I've cut myself twice. And both times it was stupidity on my part. This here is something else that I wear. These are a mesh. They're a stainless steel mesh. Do all of you know who Bailey's Chainsaw Supply is? If you don't, you can look it up. So there's a place called Bailey's Chainsaw Supply. They're in Woodland, California, and they are, I believe, the largest chainsaw accessory supply dealer in the world. There's another one called Madson's, and they're up here in Washington. And they sell all kinds of stuff. They sell these things here. They sell all kinds of woodsman and forestry and logging tools. This is where I buy these. These are about 10 bucks. They're a stainless steel mesh, and what I like about them is if it's hot outside and you get to sweating, these don't fog up because they're a steel mesh. About 40 years ago, a pair of safety glasses saved my life, so I never go without wearing them anymore. I had a knot come off of a chainsaw and it hit me in the right lens of a pair of what they call jelly bean safety glasses, and it turned the entire lens white. You've all seen plastic when it bends, it's white. I sent the glasses back to Jelly Bean with a little report about what happened. They sent me back 2 new pairs of safety glasses and a lab report. That knot hit my safety glasses at 90 miles an hour. They said I would not have survived that. If you get hit with a knot about that big around, about like that, and 90 miles an hour in the eye, it's going to be a really bad day for you. So I don't play around with it. I am a really old school guy, but I don't play around with it. I spend a lot of time in the woods all by myself, and I'd rather not get hurt. I kind of took one of my old helmets out of retirement to use for this.
What about the visors that go down over there instead of the safety glass, or do you use them both? It's the mesh visor.
Yeah.
What do you think about those?
They're a good thing to use.
Okay.
So this guide system has got 3 pieces that touch the log and 2 on the end, and there's screws and there's 1 nail. I put the nail there for an example. It used to be you always use nails, but now with everybody using a screw gun and the advent of so much screw guns, screws are more prevalent. So the screws are 3 inches long, but the saw is going to sit here, and you have to drop the saw down to over 4 inches so it doesn't hit the screws. So hopefully I did this right and did my calculations, and I don't hit a screw and look like a damn fool.
And then I've seen other ones that screw onto the end of the log right
Yes.
here. What do you think about that versus this right here?
It works just fine.
Okay.
It's a matter of your choice. Granberg sells things called slabbing rail brackets, and that's what you're talking about.
Okay.
And they work pretty good.
And you got wood on there instead of running it right on the metal, right?
Yes, and I'm going to tell you why in a minute. Now, there's a thing on here. See this piece right here? So this is called the on-off guide bar. And what this is for is if you have a just a flat guide system, or if you're cutting your next cut with this, you want this in the center of your cut. It makes it so it doesn't dive off at the end. Now, he mentioned about the wood as opposed to the metal. Now, you can buy aluminum guide systems that are made of the same extruded aluminum as that. You never want a guide system that's steel riding on that aluminum, because it galls the aluminum really bad and it'll wear it. If it's aluminum, it's okay. But if it's steel, you don't want it riding on that aluminum. So that's why I made this guide system myself. Everybody's welcome to take a look at it and see how I made it if you want. I just made it out of some scrap steel that I had. It's about 30 years old. I put some new lumber on it. Now,
The people use ladders too every once in a while.
people
right?
do use ladders. I don't like them because they're too big and obnoxious. Now, the other mill is designed to sit flat on here and make a cut this way. Now, if you just have that, can you make lumber with just that? You can. But it's more work, and it's more tedious, and it's more painstaking, because what Granberg recommends you do is that you drop down 1.5 inches, 2 inches, and you just slab this log up. That's what they recommend you do. And then they say take a table saw or something like that to cut the edges off. I've done that, but it turns it into a whole bunch more work. The other thing you can do is you can take from here, so this log is about almost 18 inches from the cut. So you could drop this down to 16 inches and make another cut, and then you'd have a two-sided log. And then you can turn it, and then you can take a square and square up your guide system and then cut it. That's extremely difficult to get a square cut. It can be done. I've done it, but it's not easy to do. So this guide system is designed to just go on like this. And it's really simple. And the saw, as you can see, the saw sits on here. You can see why this one has to be longer than the log you're cutting. So no matter what kind of sawmill you have, you're always limited to the guide system that it has. Whether it's a band sawmill, a circle mill, it doesn't make any difference. They'll only go so far. There is a method to cut with that mill that is unlimited. I cut a 52-foot beam with that. There is a method to it. If anybody wants to learn that, I can show it to you, but it's kind of painstaking. You can cut as far as you want. But doing this kind of stuff, most of the time, 16 foot is as long a lumber as you're ever going to need. You know, sometimes you may need like a 20 foot or 24 foot center beam for a cabin or something like that. But generally speaking, 16 foot is far enough. And that, it goes like this. So on this side, there's a shoe. This side is the V rail that sits in it. And you push this and you use your throttle here and you push it along like that. Now, there's one thing that's kind of a pain in the ass about this particular thing. If you were to cut this right now and that big old slab fell off, the log would want to fall off that way. Okay, so what I try to do is I try to use great big rounds and wedge them in there. So he lifted this up for me with the tractor. But what I do is, if when I go out in the woods, I take a high lift jack with me, and I put the high lift jack right here, and I wrap a chain around it, and then I just lift it up with a high lift jack and put stuff underneath it. And again, it's work. You know, anybody that wants can come and pick these saws up and stuff, and you can see that most of it's pretty heavy. And I've cut a lot of lumber this way. I have a 20 by 24 shop that I built, and every piece of lumber in it was cut with an Alaskan sawmill. But it's one of those things that it kind of defines sweat equity.
To be aware of new videos like this one, be sure to subscribe to the Preparing for the Time of Trouble channel. For more free videos and downloadable audio podcasts, as well as handouts, go to www.preparingforthetimeoftrouble.com. Topic categories include recordings of live seminar presentations, country living, sustainable gardening, homestead remedies, how to be self-sufficient when the grid goes down, wild edible and medicinal plants, hydrotherapy, and end-time Bible prophecies. To take advantage of these free resources, go to preparingforthetimeoftrouble.com.